Let me find Stuart.
Do you see the interpreter among the people joining the event?
No, not yet.
Hi, Stuart.
Yes, so Stuart is in the panelists now, so you can speak to him, please, Louise. I'm
Yes,
just
hi,
gonna follow
Stuart.
up with the other one.
Yeah, the really urgent matter now is the interpreter. So it's nice to see that Stuart is here. Welcome. But we need to start the event right now. And my concern is about the interpreter.
Sorry, we just picked up the mistake. Apparently it's 2 p.m. Central European Time now,
This
and
is
the
now.
timing provided to them was 3 p.m. Central European Time, apparently. Well, what to do? You know what, then it's yeah, that's the feedback I just got.
That you got? Yeah, this is strange because the meeting was at 3 South African time, which is 2 p.m. And I received the same link and my link is correct, but I don't know. But anyway, that person can join the meeting right now.
I suggest Selma reaches out quickly to them. Yeah, because
Thank
the
you so
road is
much.
also trying the same.
Yes, now it's 2:07 in my time.
We can also put automated captioning on, just
Ye-
to for now. I think that's one of the ways we can get around it.
Yeah,
So maybe we
Louise,
can.
I think we need to do that. I mean,
Okay,
I was
I
thinking
think
of the
that's
same thing.
yeah,
Yeah,
that's
I'm
I think
gonna
that's a
switch it
good
on.
yeah.
It
Let's
is
Okay,
do
switched
that.
so
on
we
at the
can
moment.
start. All the people
Then
are
we start,
already.
okay? And we just apologize, and that's it, and we go on. Okay.
Okay.
Thank
Thank you so much. So now I will start. Hi, everyone. Welcome to our webinar. Before going any further, please note that we have communication access real-time translation. Sorry, because we have an issue with the sign language interpretation, but we are expecting that the person joins us very soon. And we also have an interpretation in French, Spanish, Arabic, and Portuguese. So you only need to go to the bottom of your screen and select whatever was best for you. So, well, now that you have selected, hopefully, the language, my name is Luis Eduardo Perez Murcia, and on behalf of the International Disability Alliance, International Disability and Development Consortium, the Global Campaign for Education, and all the institutions that are part of the Inclusive Disability Education Working Group, I want to welcome you all to the Disability Inclusive Education webinar, which is entitled A Call to Action to Ensure Inclusive and Equitable Quality Education. Today, we are celebrating the 2023 International Day of Persons with Disabilities. And this year, the theme is an invitation for United in Action to rescue and achieve the Sustainable Development Goals for, with, and by persons with disabilities. The propositions for, with, and by persons with disabilities are not only a way to phrase the sentence, it is an opportunity to remember that we can take any action for people with different disabilities without their consent. They are social actors who make decisions in their everyday lives, and they are bringing social change to benefit themselves and their communities. Today is also an opportunity to highlight that the rights of people with disabilities matter as much as the rights of people without disabilities. And we are all part of the same communities, of the same world. So governments and the international community have the very responsibility to effectively protect their rights. In the specific field of education, the call today is for governments and the international community to make education available, accessible, acceptable, and adaptable to the specific needs of every individual, disregarding ability or disability. In order to make this a reality rather than just a dream, and in the framework of the 2022 Transforming Education Summit, we call governments and the international community again to allocate the maximum of resources available to protect their rights. As Professor Katarina Tomaszewski told us 20 years ago, to protect people's rights, including the rights of people with disabilities, demands governments invest in resources. They are not for free. So we need to take a step forward to make education truly inclusive for everyone. Our agenda, we have 11 5-minute presentation from different institutions, including IDA, IDDC, GCE members, and also we have some special guests from different institutions, and I will introduce them when there is the time for them to speak. So before introducing the first speaker, I want to welcome my colleague Stephanie Peña from Humanity and Inclusion, who will lead us to a Mentimeter poll. Over to you, Stephanie. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Luis. Hi, everyone. My name is Stephanie Peña. I'm the Inclusive Education Policy and Development Lead for Humanity and Inclusion. And we have created a Mentimeter poll for you all to participate in. I'm going to try to put the link into the chat. I'm having a little bit of difficulty sharing it with participants. So Luis, Eduardo, or someone, if you could help me distribute the link. Here is the question that we've posed for you all. The question, I'm hoping that you can see my screen. Is it open? Okay, the question that we've posed for you is what word or phrases come to mind when you think about the top priorities in promoting disability inclusive education? You're able to put in a few words if you like, and we'll go over the answers in the word cloud once we begin the discussion section of the webinar today. I'm going to try to get you this link, but if you aren't able to get the link, you can go to mentimeter.com and enter those the numbers that are on your screen, and we'll keep the Mentimeter on throughout the duration of the webinar. So if you feel inspired by anything that our speakers discuss, please feel free to share that as well. I will get this Mentimeter, if it's not already, to you panel, to all of the participants. I will get that over to you soon. And back over to you, Luis, Eduardo. Luis, you're muted. Sorry.
So sorry. So I will start again. Thanks, Stephanie. So the first speaker is Dr. Amalia Gamio. Amalia is a human rights independent expert and vice chair of the Committee of the Rights of Persons with Disabilities. Amalia was part of the team who worked in the preparation of the draft of the United Nations Convention on the Rights of Persons with Disabilities, and she was elected a member of the Committee on the Rights of Persons with Disabilities from 2019 to 2022, and recently re-elected for the period 2023-2026. Amalia, thank you very much for joining us today, and over to you.
Thank you. Thank you very much. I will speak in Spanish. Agradezco mucho el honor de representar al Comité sobre los Derechos de las Personas con Discapacidad en este importante evento. A pesar de que la entrada en vigor de la Convención cumplió 15 años y la observación general número 4 sobre el artículo 24, 7 años, seguimos enfrentando múltiples barreras para que los estados parte de la Convención implementen la educación inclusiva. Es necesario vencer las barreras que se señalan en la observación general número 4, es decir, aplicar el modelo de derechos humanos en la educación, no más asistencialismo, ni abolir la discriminación contra las personas con discapacidad, tener un conocimiento de las ventajas enormes de la educación inclusiva, contar con datos desglosados y de investigación. La voluntad política, la capacidad y los conocimientos técnicos son fundamentales. Y desde luego los mecanismos de financiación y los recursos legales son muy importantes. La Convención tiene relación con muchos otros instrumentos internacionales, por ejemplo, con los Objetivos de Desarrollo Sostenible. La meta 4.5 dice: hay que eliminar las disparidades de género en la educación y garantizar el acceso igualitario de las personas vulnerables, incluidas las personas con discapacidad. Porque ¿cómo eliminar la pobreza? Objetivo 1, si no hay educación inclusiva para todos. ¿Cómo poner fin al hambre? Objetivo 2, si no hay personas con discapacidad con educación que obtengan un trabajo digno. Objetivo 8. ¿Y cómo llegar a la igualdad de género? Objetivo 5. Si sabemos que la educación es menos accesible para mujeres que para hombres y peor para educandas con discapacidad. Es importante resaltar lo fundamental de la interseccionalidad en la educación inclusiva, porque los estudiantes con discapacidad también son migrantes, desplazados, indígenas, lo que debe ser contemplado en la educación inclusiva. El artículo 24 de la Convención se relaciona con otros artículos de la misma, con el 5, evitar la discriminación en la educación, que sigue presente. El artículo 8, que dice que hay que crear una cultura de la diversidad. El artículo 9, porque sin accesibilidad física a la información y a la comunicación es imposible tener educación inclusiva. Y, por supuesto, el artículo 27, ya que la educación inclusiva de calidad debe preparar a las personas con discapacidad para la vida laboral. Les voy a dar unos ejemplos de que los estados parte no han entendido la educación inclusiva. En los exámenes que el Comité sobre los Derechos de las Personas con Discapacidad realizó en este año 2023, por ejemplo, en Angola, preocupa al Comité la falta de transporte accesible, la insuficiente formación del personal docente, la falta de materiales didácticos accesibles. En Argentina, que el 42% de los estudiantes con discapacidad asiste a escuelas de educación especial, los escasos apoyos y ajustes razonables y la poca accesibilidad. Y en Georgia, que la educación de calidad inclusiva no se haya incorporado en la Estrategia Nacional de Educación y Ciencia 2022-2030, y que los datos estadísticos sobre los alumnos con discapacidad sean limitados o no existan. Es importante mencionar que a través del protocolo facultativo, el comité recibe quejas contra la no inclusión educativa y debemos fomentar la presentación de muchas más quejas porque se trata de una herramienta muy valiosa que beneficia no solamente a la persona que la presenta, sino a todo el colectivo, a la armonización de la legislación y a la educación y a la solución del problema en pocos meses. Les doy un ejemplo. La comunicación 41-2017, un niño con síndrome de Down que enfrentó discriminaciones, agresión física y rechazo escolar. La escuela dictaminó unilateralmente que debía ir a educación especial. Los padres se inconformaron. Sus apelaciones fueron desestimadas y hasta hubo una denuncia penal contra ellos por no querer llevarlo a educación especial. Entonces, presentaron una queja ante el comité y este consideró que la decisión administrativa de matricular al niño en un centro de educación especial sin tener en cuenta la opinión de sus padres y del propio niño y sin haber explorado de forma efectiva la adopción de ajustes razonables y sin haber tenido en cuenta las alegaciones respecto a los actos de discriminación y abusos sufridos, llevó a concluir que el Estado parte había incumplido las obligaciones en virtud de los artículos 7, 15, 17, 23 y 24, de la Convención y tenía la obligación de proporcionarles una reparación efectiva, garantizar que el estudiante sea incluido en un programa de formación efectivamente inclusivo, investigar las alegaciones de malos tratos y discriminación, acelerar la reforma legislativa para definir claramente la inclusión, formular una política integral de educación inclusiva acompañada de estrategias, vigilar que se pueda perseguir penalmente, que no se pueda perseguir penalmente a los padres de alumnos con discapacidad por exigir el derecho de sus hijos a una educación inclusiva en igualdad de condiciones. De manera que nosotros invitamos a todos los estados parte a que presenten muchas quejas, porque es la forma real de que se solucionen los problemas con mayor rapidez. Muchísimas gracias y sigamos llamando a la acción para una educación inclusiva y de calidad.
Thank you, Amalia. Thank you very much for sharing with us all these kind of forms of social forms of injustice, and that really make us to think about the importance of working definitely more foreign governments and in the international community to provide more resources and actions to protect people's right to education. Now, the next panel will unpack the disability inclusive education call to action, and we will have 3 presentations from my colleagues, Diane, from International Disability Alliance, Jennifer Rick from GCE US, and Mariana Rush from International Disability and Development Consortium. Over to you, Diane.
Thank you. And could I have my slides, please?
Yes, please. Rosalena, can you please share Diane's slides?
Hello, everyone, and really glad to see people from so many parts of the world joining us today. Last year, just over a year ago, the Secretary General of the United Nations convened the Transforming Education Summit, which he organized in recognition of the fact that we were very far away from reaching Sustainable Goal 4, which we just heard about. And a number of the civil society organizations that participated in the summit and in the pre-summit that had been held several months before, felt that it was really necessary to bring to everyone's attention not only the fact that we were lagging behind in reaching Sustainable Development Goal in general, but in particular, learners with disabilities were being left out. And as a result of that, a number of civil society organizations came together, spearheaded by the International Disability Alliance, which I represent, which is the organization of organizations of persons with disabilities around the world, the International Disability and Development Consortium, IDDC, which represents non-government organizations working in development and disability, and the Global Campaign for Education, which has a concern for education worldwide. And together, we decided that it was necessary to raise people's awareness of the fact that inclusive education is needed both to ensure that those with disabilities benefit from education, but also to improve education for all learners. And the context for doing that was recognizing that of the 240 million children with disabilities worldwide, they were at a great disadvantage in terms of accessing education. And the COVID pandemic had really put them even further behind. Compared to learners or to children without disabilities, children with disabilities were 49% more likely to never have attended school, half as likely to never have attended school, and 42% were less likely to have the necessary reading and numeracy skills. We also recognize that solutions to include learners with disabilities would enhance education for all. And so as a result of that, we launched a call to action. Next slide, please. Where we asked organizations, including governments, civil society, foundations, multilateral institutions, to make commitments by 2030 three major commitments. First, to progressively increase budgetary allocations for disability inclusive education towards being at least 5% of education budgets. We recognize that 5% is not enough to achieve full inclusion, but it's an important start. Next slide, please. We also ask governments and funders and all those involved to set a medium to long-term target to ensure that all learners with disabilities are reached in all education programs. No more of the barriers that we just heard about, keeping learners with disabilities out. And then finally, next slide, to ensure that all education programs and grants mainstream disability and include disability inclusion criteria and targets. Next slide, please. If you're interested, if your organization has not yet signed on, I'm posting on a slide a QR code that you can, so that you can access the full text of the call to action, and also so that you can encourage your organization to sign on. And then I'd like to turn to one of our partners, to Jennifer Riggs, who's the Executive Director of the Global Campaign for Education US, to tell you a bit more about the call to action. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Diane, and it's so wonderful to be here with all of you today. Just wanted to double check to see if people can view the screen, and we'll share these links and details as well. The Disability Inclusive Education Call to Action to ensure inclusive and equitable quality education. Thanks to Diane for sharing the importance and the key components of this call to action. We're really grateful to the 225 governments. I'm just going to quickly show where we're at as of today. Multilateral organizations, civil society organizations, and global leaders that have all signed on in support as of today. We're also really thrilled to be able to share just this week that in terms of endorsements, we're really pleased that the FCDO of the UK government has joined, in addition to the government of Sierra Leone and many others. And in fact, that the FCDO is challenging other donors, all governments, to join and get involved in the same way. And we can share a more detailed blog post with colleagues from FCDO and the UK government that was just released this week. So in particular, we wanted to also let people know that thanks to this amazing collaboration, also launching just today is this briefing note to help to share different ways and different ideas that you can endorse and champion this call to action on transforming education for disability inclusion. So we know, we've heard from previous speakers how absolutely vital it is, how we must all accelerate progress and not wait until tomorrow, but to do so right away. And in fact, this goes into more depth on different ways to not only endorse and champion this call to action, but to get involved with ways to make sure that there's full funding for the twin track approach to disability inclusive education that's vital to ensure inclusive education for all, and to make sure that we have strong targets to ensure that all learners are being reached, and to really critically ensure that all education programs, grants, work at scale, mainstreams disability, and includes disability inclusion criteria and targets. So we've laid out some ideas for at the national level for governments, international development partners, donor agencies, civil society organizations, multilaterals. It's really critical that we all make these changes internally and externally and work together to make this a reality. So again, we want to really thank everyone who's taking action. If you have questions, do let us know. And we'd really encourage everyone to sign on, reach out. encourage others to sign on as well. Let's grow this to ensure that everyone truly is being reached. And with that, I'm really thrilled to be able to introduce Mariana Rudge, our next speaker. She's representing the International Disability and Development Consortium, or IDDC, and she's also a senior policy advisor for social inclusion and education at Sightsavers. Mariana is just an amazing advocate and leader, and she's going to take us into the next stage of things that we can all do to really expand this call to action and make sure that disability inclusive education is a key component of education for all. Over to you, Mariana.
Thanks, Jennifer. Hi, everyone. It's a pleasure to be here with you today. I just wanted, as Jennifer said, to build a bit on the call to action and talk to you about ways we can use the call to action in some opportunities coming up in the next few years. So in the context of the SDGs, we know that the promise to leave no one behind, increased awareness of the need to ensure that everyone can access a good education. But we know the goals remain really off track and that learners with disabilities continue to be excluded. And when international financing is needed most, official development assistance for education is actually falling. So the Education Finance Watch report in 2023 reported that foreign aid to education fell by 7% between 2020 and 2021. And so following years of underinvestment, we may still have 84 million children out of school in 2030. And the latest SDG report estimates that if no additional measures are taken, only 1 in 6 countries will meet SDG 4 and achieve universal access to quality education. So the scenario isn't great, but it's not all bad news. Next year also brings us some good opportunities to move forwards on the SDGs and guarantee the right to education for all. So following a request from the Secretary General, the UN system is preparing for a Summit of the Future, which will happen next year in September. And the summit will launch a Pact for the Future, which is supposed to outline solutions for a better tomorrow. The Pact for the Future will address many issues, so from peace and security to development financing to youth and future generations. But it should also build on the Transforming Education Summit, although it's not very clear yet where education fits in that Pact for the Future. So as Amalia flagged in the beginning, education is a core pillar of the SDG agenda and is also essential to unlocking all the other goals. So we would argue that it should be at the heart of any Pact for the Future or any promises for future generations. So by empowering marginalized groups, including people with disabilities, education enables individuals to be active agents of change in the pursuit of more inclusive, just societies and communities. So in our call to action, we outline some very clear steps that different actors can take to build education systems that deliver education for all learners in all their diversity. And now, as we start to engage with those negotiations on the Pact for the Future, which started in New York just this week, we would also like to ask everyone in this call and all the governments attending the actual Summit of the Future to do 3 things. So firstly, please advocate for the Pact for the Future to include some very clear actions on how to deliver the promise to leave no one behind. Agenda 2030 will not be met if the world continues to leave huge inequalities and lots of people, like people with disabilities, behind. Secondly, we would also like you to champion the call to action, of course, and push in particular for the Pact for the Future to include commitments by member states to make education investments a priority. As Eduardo said in the beginning, there's no magic. This doesn't happen automatically. It needs investment, it needs resources, but it is the most effective way to give all the children a better future. And finally, we also wanted to ask you to please help ensure that civil society voices are engaged and involved in that vision for the future. We need to bring the voices of OPDs, of people with disabilities and other marginalized groups into any discussion about a Pact for the Future. So it's quite shocking that we're so far behind on the SDGs and that 250 million children are still out of school, but that's a collective responsibility. I think we all have a role to play, and we would ask you all to please share the call to action and please bring the voices of those people we work with to make sure that they are heard within those discussions about what kind of future we want. Thanks very much.
Thank you, Mariana, Jennifer, and Diane from backing the call to action. Now it's time to move on, and we are going to hear a diverse group of panelists will share with us the actions taken by their institutions after endorsing the call to action. So I will give now the floor to Hannah Katrina Alusari, is the Senior Education Specialist in the Education Global Practice of the World Bank and the Global Lead for Inclusive Education. She holds a PhD in Education from the University of Oulu, Finland, and has worked for the past 24 years in the field of education sector, partnership and education research in Europe, Africa, Middle East, and North America. Rosalina, please share the screen of the Hannah Katrina presentation, and over to you, Hannah Katrina. Thank you very much for joining us today.
Thank you so much, Luis, and everybody else, and I hope you can hear me well. That's good. Okay, so as my slides shared in the screen show, I am talking about how we have been moving forward towards institutionalizing inclusion and equity in multilateral organization, which is the World Bank. And if I can ask the slides to be made bigger, I think we don't see it in the presentation mode as yet. Next slide. I am going to briefly talk about the landscape in the World Bank to support inclusion in education. And then I will briefly introduce the guidance we put together for disability inclusion in education operation in particular. Then a very brief look at the focus activities we've been involved since 2022. And then looking at Inclusive Education Policy Academy a little bit in more details. Environmental and social framework in the World Bank has been very fundamental framework for guiding investment project financing. So any partner country that we work with needs to follow these steps. There is a good practice note for non-discrimination related to sexual orientation and gender identity, and also a good practice note on discrimination and disability. So the World Bank really acknowledges the broad inclusion and then has focused guidance for specific marginalized groups, learners with disabilities being one of them. We have also a disability inclusion accountability framework. And if we can change to the slide 3, please, which has been put together with our social sector colleagues. So it has brief guidance for each of the sectors. Then what has also been very instrumental has really been the commitment that was made in 2018 in London in the Global Disability Summit. We then announced that all investment project financing in education will be disability inclusive by 2025, and we are moving towards this direction. Also, the IDA 20 has human capital policy commitment, support countries to meet the needs of persons living with disabilities. And to ensure the equity and inclusion in education and education operations and supporting countries in the process of strengthening inclusion in education, we put together the guidance note that you can see on the right-hand side of these slides, and it's also aligned, it's guided to be used with the Inclusive Education Resource Guide. And in the next slide, you can see briefly the 4 criteria that we put together internally. So we did this process very participatory manner. We involved teams on the ground and wanted to make the criteria meaningful in operations. So the first one is there mentioned, which is stakeholder engagement. So it means that World Bank education teams need to get involved with meaningful consultations, including organizations of persons with disabilities. And they should do it in the beginning, but also throughout the project implementation. The analysis is the next criteria, and it really calls for action for the teams to look at the data that exist in the country. If it's not there, they are guided to take a look on what is it that they can do during the life of the project cycle. Inclusive project design is about ensuring that any thematic area the country is working with has inclusive project design. And we do propose the twin track approach. We ask for at least one of the 2, but the teams can do both. They can do general support or they can do the focused support. Monitoring and reporting is also there so that it can be looked at what kind of indicators have actually shown then the progress forward. We still have a lot of challenges, as mentioned on the next slide, related to mainstreaming disability inclusion in education. And for that, we are finalizing our inclusive education approach note. So the guidance you just saw is mainly for the IPFs, investment project financing, that needs to follow the environmental and social framework. But we really want to make sure that any analytical work or research that our teams are involved with will have inclusion lens there from the beginning, and also any other lending mechanisms that the organization uses. So this inclusive education approach paper has a deeper dive for disability inclusion. It also includes 2 technical notes. One of them is about financing inclusive education, and the other one is about ensuring equity and inclusion in teaching and learning. It focuses on curriculum pedagogy and assessment. And the internal reviews of this paper are almost finalized. And when we get through those, we will also be asking stakeholders to help us ensure that this makes sense from the perspectives of all the stakeholders in this field. You can see other global public goods and one example of a recent study that was carried out in East Asia and Pacific. The links are also part of the presentation. I'm happy to share them in the chat during the webinar. Inclusive Education Policy Academy is then mentioned on the right-hand side of this slide. And this is also a global public good that we have been working with already with Rwanda, and also had a multi-country cohort of the Gambia, Zambia, and Ethiopia, which we were doing last before the summer. So this cohort was there until May 2023. We are going to have multiple country cohorts, virtual as well as in-person phases for the Policy Academy starting next calendar year. In the next slide, you can see briefly what these policy academies are all about. So it really aims at building that community of practice in the country as well as in regions. So far, we work mainly with African countries. We have other thematic policy academies in the Education Global Practice of the World Bank, and those have also covered other areas. We are building on in other initiatives that have been carried out, for example, IIEP, UNICEF, Technical Roundtable. We have involved colleagues that have also participated that foundational course. The way we work with countries is also really looking at what is it that they need. It is a professional development course and peer learning opportunity. It aims at packaging the latest cutting edge knowledge in an organized learning programs. And it's online hybrid learning modules, and including also in-person workshops and study visits, which we are planning to do next year as well. And it is really been interesting to see that countries that are just in the beginning will benefit on it, but also those who've already moved forward. And we go with the tailor-made approach. And in the next slide, you can see an example of Rwanda Inclusive Education Policy Academy. The user, the participants guide that we put together, and the thematic areas that Rwandan colleagues were willing to work with were identification, referral of learners with disabilities, inclusive teacher education and training, curriculum assessment, teaching and learning materials, as well as education technology, and then inclusive school leadership and inspection practices. So we don't go with a ready-made program saying this is what we're going to do, but we'll ask the countries what is it that they need. In the next slide, just as one example, I think it's interesting always to look, what is it that the countries themselves really see, where are they at, and what is it that they need. Rwanda here mentions how they want to continue the support for systemic focus on disability inclusion. And I think we can also here see how mainstreaming inclusion and systematizing community outreach programs, coordination of different stakeholders, as well as looking at how to share knowledge in different levels, from global, national to the country level, are important. The data issue is still a challenge, so more actions should also be looked into that, as well as really truly expanding focus on disability inclusion throughout the education system. So far, the main focus has been basic education. So how do we make sure the early learning as well as higher education and skills will be more involved? And in the next slide, you can see the email where you can reach me from, as well as the Inclusive Education Global team. And I'm really grateful for the opportunity to be here in this webinar today. And over to you, Luis, to continue with others.
Thank you, Hannah. Thank you very much for your presentation. Now, I will give the floor to Member of Parliament of Canada, Mr. Mike Lake. Over to you, Mike.
Well, thank you very much. And I'm going to start here by sharing my screen. I'm just going to show a video, give you a little bit of background quickly. I have a son. I'm a Canadian member of Parliament, 18 years. I have a son, Jaden, who's incredible. He's in his 20s now, who has autism. And the first half of my presentation is basically just going to be a video that I'm going to show that gives you an idea of what his life was like when he was in school. This video is from his grade 11 year of school, and shows the level to which he was included. He was included in a regular classroom all through his schooling with a full-time aide, and in grade 11 had this experience at his school.
Millwood's Christian School debuts Bye Bye Birdie at the Paramount Theater in just under an hour. In the musical, a rock star named Conrad Birdie is the fan favorite, but in real life, it's Jaden Lake, a nonverbal student with an important message for his castmates. Laurel Clark explains why.
The cast members of Bye Bye Birdie loosen their vocal cords with a classic scale. But their rehearsal isn't complete without one more exercise, a run they've come to know as Jaden's warm-up. They sing ba 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 because it's the only sound 17-year-old Jaden makes. The grade 11 student has autism and is nonverbal.
Let's face it, including a kid with autism in the musical theater performance is a risk for them. I mean, everybody wants that performance to be perfect, right? And when you include Jaden in there, you run the risk that he's going to squeal at an inopportune time because he's so excited to be there, or that he's going to start to wander off the edge of the stage somewhere because he sees something that's interesting.
That hasn't happened. In fact, you only need to watch one number to see Jaden is like any other cast member. He's just performing with the help of a buddy system.
We just hold his hand to guide him which place to go, and if he's going off somewhere, we watch over him. And yeah, he's like a brother.
Jaden has always loved music. The sound of music is one of his favorites. He doesn't sing, but his mom says musical theater plays to other strengths.
Because he loves routine, you've memorized a pattern for, you know, how they take him on stage, how they take him off stage. That makes him thrive. He loves order and pattern.
And his visual memory is so strong, choreographers know once they teach Jaden certain steps, they can't make any changes.
Whatever you teach Jaden, you're not going to be able to go back and say, hey, by the way, can you now do this? Because that first thing that we teach him is the thing that sticks in his mind.
Jaden's parents see changes in him, how content he is being part of the cast.
I think he just loves being part of a group of kids. You know, everybody likes to be part of a group even if they can't verbalize it, right?
Being part of the group, Jaden is enhancing his peers' performance too.
He's a fun person to be with. He also encourages the other casts, just high-fiving everyone.
And so, in just a few months, without singing a single word, Jaden has taught these students something his teacher wants them to remember long after curtain call.
They can just stop and go, you know what, there is a value to absolutely every person.
And when you accept someone unconditionally, you allow them to shine too. Laurel Clark, Global News.
So that gives you a little bit of an idea of sort of my motivation, I think, in a sense. And, you know, my goal for every kid is that they have the same opportunities that Jaden's had. And so to that end, just such an honor to be here today with all of you and to listen to the other presentations. I've got a lot of friends on this call who I've seen lately as we've been working on this very issue in the Canadian parliamentary system in a committee. Earlier this year, I moved a motion in the House of Commons that basically says this. It says, where the Canadian government spends money on education domestically or internationally, clear consideration must be given to the maximum inclusion of people with disabilities, including people with intellectual and developmental disabilities. And that motion passed unanimously in the House of Commons. So members of all parties who generally don't agree on anything agreed that this is something that they can get behind. Now, that motion was non-binding, but what it means is that every time we talk about the issue, we can kind of point to the way individual members of parliament voted, and every single member of parliament voted in favor of that motion. And so we moved that now to a committee study in the International Human Rights Committee of the Canadian Parliament, again, all parties, and we're having a conversation, a 4-meeting conversation, 2 hours each, about global disability inclusive education. And we started that. If you want to check out, well, I've got my social media, or had my social media on there, but you can reach out to me and take a look at the links, or follow me on social media. And you'll see we had the first meeting. We had Tim Shriver and Diane Richler and Jennifer Rigg and Robert Jenkins from UNICEF and Yasmin Sharif from Education Cannot Wait sort of laid out the challenge in the first meeting. And we've had international development organizations weighing in subsequent meetings, and individuals with lived experience weighing in. We have one more meeting left. We had our 3rd meeting yesterday, and just so exciting to see people engaged in this important conversation. But of course, conversation's not enough. We have to move towards action. Meeting after meeting after meeting, we just bring up that call to action, bring it to everyone's awareness. If I have organizations that have been before committee that are not signed on, we challenge them to sign on to the call to action. And just thank you so much. I see my times. I'm watching my stopwatch here. I see my time is up already. But just thank you so much for including me in this conversation. We just wanted you to know what we're working on here in Canada. We want to do this with everyone, every parliament around the world. So if you think that there's a connection you can help us make to further this conversation anywhere in the world, please reach out to us. And again, thank you for including me and Jaden through the video in the important conversation today.
Thank you, Mike. Thank you very much for joining us and drawing on your personal experience and Jake's experience, because it really shows us how individual experience are related to social broader issues that are important for all of us as individuals, as human beings. Thank you so much. Now I will give the floor to Pravina Sukraf-Elif, World Blind Union and ICB. Pravina is an admitted advocate of the High Court of South Africa. She has a PhD in inclusive education. Over to you, Pravina, and thanks for joining us today. The floor is yours, Pravina.
Warm greetings. Thank you, Louise. Thank you, Louise. Am I audible, Louise? Is it fine? Can you hear me?
I hear you, yes.
Okay, great. Thank you. Thank you. It is actually, it's a great privilege for me to be part of the webinar and address all the participants today. South Africa was one of the co-sponsors of the side event held at the Transforming Education Summit last year, September, when the call to action for inclusive, quality, equitable education was released. When reflecting on the call to action as outlined by Diane earlier, on how low to middle income countries can transition to build and maintain a single inclusive education system for all, it is clear that disability inclusive and responsive planning, monitoring and evaluation, reporting and auditing must be in the management and operations across all government departments. A high-level commitment from political principles, from extending to the Department of Education and all other relevant departments to build, implement, and then maintain an inclusive education system so as to ensure that that commitment is then translated into policy, legislation, and strategies within government institutions and its partners. Disability mainstreaming does not mean that we need to have separate programs, but rather that services are offered in a single inclusive education system. Also provides for all specialist services by individual learners with and without disabilities. For education, This would mean that countries must ensure schools, educators, resources, technology, services, curriculum, multidisciplinary personnel, etc., must be structured, capacitated, and resourced to cater for the needs of every individual learner, to ensure that they are screened, identified, assessed, and supported throughout their education journey. In this regard, it is imperative that an automated, integrated monitoring and reporting system is developed in countries to ensure including disability-related targets to better understand where the states are indeed providing inclusive, quality, equitable education, which includes access, support, opportunities, and resource allocation for children with disabilities. I want to highlight, as being one of the members of the Inclusive Education Task Team, the IDA Inclusive Education Task Team, when we put together our flagship report, one of the quotes that stands out for me, and let me just read it to you. The instances where placing children and youth with disabilities in mainstream classrooms without appropriate access, resources, and support have been used as the example of the failure of inclusive education. These arguments fail to acknowledge that a fully inclusive education system is one is accessible, a lack of access and or resources, and not providing an equitable education is not inclusive education and is a failure of that system and not the failure of the child. The South African government considers education its highest domestic priority, and education receives the greatest share of its GDP, approximately 5% of it. Approximately 30% of the education budget at the moment is allocated to fund special schools. It is aimed to transition from budgeting separately for special schools and mainstream schools to having a budget system for all. And this is how it is currently described in terms of the twin track approach in the call to education. And this is something that we are currently working towards. The Department of Education in South Africa has, since the call to education, established a ministerial 6 that was passed in 2001. The policy is actually, the time frame has lapsed in 2021. And therefore, we have come together to plot the way forward in terms of how we can actually transition and fast track towards developing a single inclusive education system for all. The Ministry for the Department of Women, Youth, and Persons with Disabilities, to which I belong in the country, is the National Disability Rights Coordination Mechanism. And what we have done to contribute towards coordinating and monitoring progress in education is we've embarked on a research project to assess education access to support and services for children and young people with disabilities. The main aim of the research is to understand the lived experiences of children, their parents, organizations for persons with disabilities, schools, etc., in terms of the resource gaps that currently exist, so as to mobilize resources, services, and programs through public and private partnerships. The recommendations in the research report will be used to advise and guide the Department of Basic Education in terms of the review that is currently underway. In conclusion, it is clear that all states must prioritize inclusive, quality, equitable education and ensure that they are disability responsive and inclusive in terms of budgeting, planning, program and project implementation, and most of all, service delivery. Thank you. Thank you, Louise.
Luis, you were on mute.
Sorry, so sorry again. So I was saying thank you for your presentation. And now I will give the floor to Nafisa Babu, our colleague from Life for the World. Over to you, Nafisa.
Thank you, Luis Eduardo. And I'd like to say good morning, good afternoon, good evening to our friends and colleagues from the GCE. It's so great to have you on this important day and call today. So the call to action that you've been hearing about really succinctly puts together the actions that we as experts in the sector see that is required, to make tangible progress towards the right to education for the 240 million girls and boys worldwide with disabilities. And the majority of whom really live in developing countries, and particularly on our continent that I come from, Sub-Saharan Africa. So I want to tell you about one of my favorite countries in the world, the youngest nation, South Sudan. So being part of this team supporting the people of South Sudan to build an education system from the ground up that is disability inclusive has been one of the most professional, rewarding experiences of my life. In fact, through the work of Light for the World, we also helped to set up the first national education coalition in South Sudan. And I hope Adolf, my colleague Adolf, is here on this call today. So the team really has an unwavering commitment to bring about change and are not faced by challenges that they encounter. There's basically this philosophy of where there's a will, there is a way. And I really love that about them. So the call to action that you're hearing about was finalized more or less in the same time as the inclusive education policy and strategy of South Sudan. And because of the, and like I said, we wanted to really make sure that there are things in place, particularly around financing, investment, and about making sure that that the twin track approach of making sure that the system embodies and embraces inclusion, and that there are particular steps made towards supporting students with disabilities were in place. So the policy has prescribed that 5% of the budget is allocated to realizing disability inclusive education. This is similar to what is in the call to action, right? And this is a target that we have set, and the people of South Sudan are committed to reaching it. So there are challenges, right? This is a country that has been affected by war and so much turmoil over the past since its independence, and not a lot of resources are produced within the country, right? So they depend on a lot of importation of different products. But the South Sudan education spend has increased significantly over time. So in 2021, the education spend was about 11.21% of its budget, and this increased by 5.6% from 2020. And we are really hopeful that this will increase further and further with our strategic partnerships. So I want to tell you about these strategic partnerships. One of them is with the Girls Education South Sudan Challenge, and there are champions within there, pro-disability inclusion, and they've been, and with the FCDO, the UK government's education advisors, who are champions also of disability inclusion, we've really helped to push this agenda further. Another one of those very strategic partnerships we have is with the South Sudan Union of Persons with Disabilities and also SEPO. So SEPO is quite a unique organization. It's called Community Empowerment for the Progress Organization. It's a nonprofit that was started to engage university students and fresh graduates to build their respective communities and societies on a voluntary basis. So do a lot of work in peace building, conflict mitigation, human rights, helping people to understand democratic processes and governance. So what we've been working with them to also make sure that the policies that we've developed are truly participatory, and promoting this participatory process. We are also promoting institutionalization, accountability, and the transparency of both government and also leaders within the community. They know what the policy is about on inclusive education. They know what's in the strategy. We also want to we also work with them to promote engagement in the community, to build, to understand human rights. So SEPO has really taken the South Sudan Union for Persons with Disabilities under their wing. They actually now are they are housed in the same building, and they've been coaching them to effectively engage with high-level officials, how to advocate to parliamentarians to ensure the adoption of the policies. So this year, the UN Convention for the Rights of Persons with Disabilities was ratified by the government of South Sudan, which is really great. They've also been working with these young graduates with disabilities. We call them the disability inclusion facilitators, to raise awareness in their communities through radio, through community engagement and dialogues, to help them to understand how to analyze a budget. Who do you go and speak to within the Ministry of Finance, who are doing a power analysis of the key power players? And this has been a really helpful and enriching process for the disability inclusion facilitators. They take that skill set back to the community and also work with community leaders there to activate interest and commitment around disability inclusion, and also unlock funding for it. So with the new disability, what we can see in happening in South Sudan, there's a new Education Cannot Wait multi-year resilience program that is also disability inclusive. In fact, it's been lauded as one of the best programs because it took such a great participatory approach as well. And that's currently on the go in South Sudan. We're also awaiting a massive, there will be a big call for a funding call out for £19 million investment by the UK government on ensuring education for all in South Sudan, which has a strong disability component, and that will be released soon. So they are really great step changes. And I think that, like I said, it comes through partnership development, strategic partnership, not just with people on the ground, people with disabilities, people outside of the education sector, and also donor governments who are pro-inclusion. And I'm really happy and excited about the work also from within the Canadian government's commitment to make disability inclusion a reality in all their programs. So what I want to encourage now, if I think about our national coalitions on this call, I really want to call and challenge you to reach out to allies working in the space of democratic transformation and citizenship and finance. Bring those allies on board. You know, we need to stop working in our little silos. Also look at those champion donor governments and also UN agencies. We heard now the World Bank has a great commitment towards disability inclusion. UNICEF has also said that they want to make all their 10% of funding should be going towards disability inclusion. And they've endorsed and embraced this call to action. And we see that the government of Canada is also well on that path as well. Let's plan jointly how to make this call to action a reality by setting up our own targets and ways of influencing in the next couple of months. So let me challenge you here to please endorse this call to action and find ways of working together to make sure that we leave no one behind. Thank you.
Thank you, Nafisa. Thank you so much. So now, last but not least, I will give the floor to Stuart Cameron. He's an independent researcher and advisor on education and international development, who currently works for Global Partnership for Education. So, Rosalena, please share the screen with Stuart's presentation, and over to you, Stuart. 5 minutes, please. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Luis, and thanks very much to the GCE and everyone for inviting me here today. I'm very happy to be here. As Luis said, I'm the thematic lead on equity and inclusion at the Global Partnership for Education. Can I have the next slide, please? Thank you. So GPE, for those who may not be familiar, is the world's only partnership and fund entirely dedicated to education in lower income countries. And we work with over 80 partner countries. GPE's mission is to mobilize partnerships and investments that transform education systems in developing countries, leaving no one behind. So inclusive education is one of the priority areas in GPE's strategy for 2025, meaning that countries can apply to GPE for funding, for reforms and programs which would prioritize inclusion. The next slide, please. So with our new strategy for 2020 to 2025, we institutionalized a new operating model, which included several mechanisms for ensuring no one is left behind. Excuse me. And these included mechanisms for inclusive policy dialogue and prioritization through local education groups, which are groups led by the government and including development partners in each country, analysis of the enabling factors for education transformation in each country, and something called a partnership compact, which is an agreement between partner countries and GPE and other partners about priority reform areas. And these processes include looking at disability data and looking at how the right to education is assured within each country as a kind of assessment of whether a country has the enabling factors in place for a system transformation to happen. GP has a number of financing instruments, including grants, which consider marginalized groups, gender crisis situations, and children with disabilities. And for example, these grants ask about the inclusiveness of the activities which countries want to fund as part of the application and quality assurance process. And then GP has a number of streams of work on learning and accountability. This includes funding civil society organizations, funding knowledge exchange and applied research, and monitoring indicators on equity, including, where available, disaggregating indicators by disability, counting the number of beneficiaries of GPE-funded programs who have disabilities, and also tracking the availability of disability data. So next slide, please. So mapping these aspects of our operating model onto the call to action, these are kind of the ways that GPE is aligned with and supportive of the call to action. We are aiming to increase the overall budget in low-income countries for disability inclusive education through a couple of channels. One is through inclusive education sector dialogue and incentivizing better domestic financing and more equitable and higher content of domestic financing. Another is through directly funding disability inclusion activities through grants and ensuring that grants in other areas are disability inclusive. Ensuring learners with disabilities are reached is something that GPE is supporting through asking partner countries how disability inclusion has been considered or sort of mainstreamed across grant activities, and encouraging partner countries to prioritize equity and inclusion reforms, or ensure reforms such as those focused, say, on foundational learning are inclusive in nature of children with disabilities and other marginalized groups. We are ensuring that grants increasingly mainstream disability and include disability inclusion criteria and targets by having developed a coding scheme for identifying disability inclusion activities and the budget that's assigned to them, tracking intended and actual beneficiaries who are children with disabilities, and tracking the availability of disability disaggregated data, and supporting countries to improve their own data on disability so that outcomes can be tracked better at national level. Next slide, please. I can see I'm low on time already, so but I wanted to note several examples of how this is working out in practice in countries like Uganda, for example. The GP Partnership Compact is focused on quality foundations for learning, but the compact is very much made sure that it includes learners with disabilities when considering interventions such as access and quality. Other countries like Tanzania are more directly focused on implementing inclusion activities that have been set out in their inclusive education strategies. So thank you very much. The next slide, please, just shows some resources, which I hope we can also paste into the chat. Do please check out our recent paper on leaving no one behind, which sets out a lot of these mechanisms in more detail. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Stuart. Thank you very much. So now we have the chance to have some minutes for a Q&A, but before that, it would be considerate to give some kind of 3-5 minutes to interpreters, and if that is okay with you all. So we will resume in 3 minutes, and I will give the floor to my colleague, Stephanie Peña, who will be leading the Q&A.
Thank you, Luis Eduardo. Before we enter the Q&A and discussion section, I want to just share our responses from the Mentimeter. Thank you, everyone, for participating and for being patient with us as we figured out how to share that. But as you can see, we've got a lot of responses today, a lot of responses on the priorities of promoting disability inclusive education. You'll see accessibility, collaboration, political will, funding, a lot of the things that we were able to discuss quite a bit today with our incredible speakers. And again, just a reminder, we will be sending out the presentations and the recording after the webinar is finished. So you'll be able to access all of the really great links and everything that all of our speakers have been sharing with us. And before we go on to the Q&A section, we do have one discussant left. Luis, is that all right if we do that, or do we need to wait a couple minutes for that, or no?
Yes, because the interpreter has asked for the time, so
Okay.
maybe we just stop for 3 minutes and then just resume. Thank you, Stephanie.
Yeah. All right, in 3 minutes, we'll go back and I'll introduce our very last speaker. Thank you, everyone.
Thank you.
Oh.
Did I miss something? What's going on?
Sorry, Nafisa, they're on a break at the moment. It's just a 5-minute break. I think it's almost done. Sorry.
Thank you. Just to let you know, some of us are trying to answer the questions in the Q&A. It's also helpful for people just to go and have a look there, because there might be questions that you've had in your mind that you'd like to, that have already been asked. And so the answers will be there for everyone to see.
Ready to continue, Stephanie and all.
Great, thank you, Nafisa, for that as well. Please do put your questions into the Q&A, and we'll try to have the panelists answer before we all have to hop off in 10 minutes. But our last discussant we have today, I'm excited to introduce you to Mr. Umaru Manu, the technical advisor to the president and educational focal point of the West African Federation of Associations for the Advancement of Persons with Disabilities. Over to you, Mr. Umaru. It looks like you're still muted, Mr. Umaru. If you can come off of mute, please, and give us your point of your discussion, that would be really great. Thank you.
Umaru, can you hear us?
His speaker was just working, so I'm hoping it's not an issue with connection. Mr. Umaru, can you hear us? I'm going to give it about 1 more minute before we have to hop over to the Q&A.
He's probably having technical problems.
Is it possible for someone from GCE Secretariat to ask him to come off of mute? Because it might be, I don't have access, but if someone is able to ask as a...
Hi, sorry, I've been trying to contact him, even send him an individual message. It seems like it's either his screen is actually frozen or something. That's what it shows on my side. My apologies.
No problem. We apologize for any of the technical issues. If there's a presentation, again, just a reminder to everyone on this call that it will be sent to you. Our apologies, these technical things happen every time, one way or another. So, Mr. Umaru, if you are able to come in, please do. But in the meantime, we do have a couple of questions in the chat, but also we have some general questions that were sent to us ahead of time. So please, panelists, feel free to jump in and answer any of these questions. The first question is if you can share maybe one challenge that you faced and one opportunity that you see to advance this agenda in the upcoming year. And again, this goes out to any of the panelists. So please feel free to take yourself off mute and let us know your feedback. Or if any of our civil society organization reps would like to come in and give some suggestions for ways that they see that organizations and governments can continue to advocate and advance this agenda, that would be a great opportunity as well.
¿Tú quieres responder esta pregunta, Amalia?
Could you repeat the question, please?
Yeah, the question is if you can share maybe one challenge that you see and one opportunity towards advancing this agenda in the next year.
Sí, claro, desde luego. Para mí, una enorme oportunidad está en que la sociedad civil está tomando se está empoderando enormemente y está tomando los derechos de la convención como propios y está luchando y tratando de que se implemente el artículo 24 sobre educación. Durante nuestros exámenes a los países en el comité, hemos visto una enorme participación de la sociedad civil y esto me parece una enorme oportunidad porque al menos en mi país, México, los cambios se han dado cuando la sociedad civil ha presionado fuertemente. Para mí esa es la enorme oportunidad. Y agregaría lo que dije en mi presentación, presenten quejas sobre la no inclusión ante el comité. Esto es una herramienta que debe utilizar la sociedad civil. Gracias.
Thank you so much for that response. If we have anyone else, who would like to respond, please have an opportunity to. Otherwise, with our last 5 minutes, I do believe we do have announcements and some closing. Luis Eduardo, is that correct?
That is correct. Thank you so much,
Thank you all.
Stephanie. So because we are really running out of time, I will leave the floor to my colleague Kuselwa, who has some announcements to make related to our disability inclusive education learning community. Over to you, Kuselwa.
Thank you so much, Luis, and thanks to everyone coming in this last few minutes with just a very quick and short announcements about the logistics and in terms of engaging on this important work moving forward. We've got a couple of processes that are planned. I think some of you in this call might have been engaging with the Inclusive Education and Early Childhood Community of Practice, which was led by the GCE US, and that is probably since its establishment. So we are happy to announce that we have joined forces with the GCE US, and we will be working on jointly coordinating this community of practice, and the approach on that is to expand its scope, its reach, as well as the processes that will, of course, enhance its impact. So in terms of maximizing the scope and the reach, we have introduced a digital community in our main knowledge exchange and learning platform that we have established in 2021, but recently revamped to include the communities for knowledge exchange and learning. And in those platforms, we have included the inclusive education and early childhood as a community for learning and for purposes of collaborating on advocacy and key important actions like the ones that we just had today. So we would like to invite you to join and grow this community, and so that you stay informed about all the learning affairs as well as advocacy actions that we are going to jointly take together, and those will be facilitated and shared through that platform. So I'm going to share in the link in the chat box the links where you can actually gain access to that platform, and also in the post email that we are going to share following this webinar will contain more information about really becoming active as a member of the community, either by participating or really becoming like an organization that is contributing in its operational processes. So all that information will be shared following the webinar. So that's all I wanted to share with you today. But thank you so much for the great discussion. We'll consolidate all the resources and make sure that the links to the recordings are shared as well. Thank you.
Thank you, Kuselwa. So we have 1 minute left. So thank you very much for the more than 100 people attending this event. Thanks to all the speakers for sharing their experience and knowledge with us. Thank you to the International Disability Alliance, International Disability and Development Consortium, and all the members of the Disability Inclusion Education Group for all their work on this webinar and all the interpreters. I also want to thank you, my colleagues at GCE, Salma, Rosalena Cuselwa, who were behind the scenes, but whose support is vital for making this event a success. Thank you all, and please encourage your governments and all education stakeholders around you to endorse the call to action and effectively respect, protect, and fulfill everyone's right to education. Until next time, have a good day. Yes, enjoy the rest of the day wherever you are. Thank you so much. Bye-bye.